Howdy! Welcome to the Texas A&M University College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences Peer Programs STEM Education Series. Today, Histology Professor Dr. Larry Johnson will present Anatomy and Physiology. Anatomy is the study of the body's structures, while physiology reveals how they function. Pay particular attention to the intricate relationship between structure and function as Dr. Johnson takes us on a tour of the human body systems. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Tori, and welcome to all. Today we're going to talk about the anatomy and physiology. Here we can see anatomy in various species. We can see the eye, we can see a little calf there, horse at the bottom, frog, and we can see individuals. All these have both structures and functions of those structures, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Basically, we want to start with anatomy, what's the definition of it, and the physiology, and talk about 4 types of tissues that are in the body, and then a little bit about the fields of anatomy, and then various organ systems of the body. We'll go through different organ systems. Now, anatomy is a study of the structure of things, where physiology is a study of the function of things, even mechanical, physical, biochemical functions of living things. That's physiology. So, as Tori said, function follows form, and that is physiology is made possible by anatomy. You can't climb a rope unless you have a rope. Blood can't go to a place unless there's a blood vessel that goes there. So, form follows a function, or vice versa, as we said. So here we can see in anatomy, we have a lot of parts. You can see in that horse, you got lots of parts there. And in anatomy, there's lots of parts to learn. Many, many words, about 4,000 or so. But they're made a little bit easier by the prefixes and suffixes of the words that help you identify the different structures. For example, AB means away from, abduction, to move away from, where adduction means to move towards. So just by changing that one letter, you change the direction of the physiology associated with that structure. So these are just the starting of the alphabet, but they're all the way down through the alphabet of these suffixes and prefixes that you'll have to be able to identify some of these structures to help you identify the different naming. Also, in the naming of structures is the planes, the different planes that you have. Maybe a sagittal plane cutting down through the middle, or maybe a transverse plane. So the different ones, maybe toward the head, maybe toward the tail. And here we can see some of those structures and how you have a little different names in veterinary medicine than you do in human medicine, where you would have posterior, that's behind your back. That would be the dorsal for a horse, for example. But these words, directional words, are part of the names of the anatomy structures that they have: lateral, medial, cranial, caudal. All those words are part of the naming of blood vessels and nerves and muscles in the body. Now, when you study anatomy, it starts out in a systematic way. That is, you start usually with a skeleton. So you learn about the different bones and how they're attached. And then you go with the muscles that go on those skeletons that make the skeleton either stand upright or make it be able to move. And then you go from there to the vascular system and the nervous system, and then usually you go to the different organs. So it's a very visually oriented class as you dissect your dog, disassemble your dog, and you see the different structures that are in there. So as we mentioned, anatomy of the horse is composed of a lot of parts that you can see. The physiology is what you can do with those parts. Have you ever seen a flying horse before? This is a horse jumping over a fence. This is what a horse can do with that anatomy that it has. Now, one characteristic of physiology, a very fundamental part of physiology, is homeostasis. That is the stable state, the stable state. It's a foundation of physiology and life itself. Without it, we'd be dead. In fact, that's usually what people die from, is the lack of maintaining homeostasis. So as the external environment changes, or maybe what you drink or eat changes, the physiology has to change in the body to keep a stable internal environment. The body is always changing to adjust to stimuli, and they want to keep, it's a dynamic equilibrium between what you're exposed to, either internal or external, and the condition that you want to maintain that will be compatible with the life of cells. For example, blood pressure. We don't want it too low, and we don't want it too high. Glucose and insulin concentrations. You eat, you increase the amount of glucose, you need more insulin, so the body releases insulin. So that's the body adjusting to whatever environment is adjusting to the glucose that's there. Same with oxygen or removal of waste. So how does the body do that? Well, one of the things it needs receptors. It needs somebody to tell them something. So the receptors receive the stimuli, and then some control system, the nervous system. It controls, it senses, and it also ignites the effectors. The effectors are the ones that can contract when the nervous system says so and do something about it. For example, if you touch something that's hot, and so the receptors note the heat, and they tell your brain, whoa, something's hot. Actually, it tells your spinal cord, because that one needs to be more local than the brain itself. You'll know you're hot, but the reaction you have is from the spinal cord itself, where the nervous system told the muscle to contract to pull that back. So these are the ways we detect the environment, and then you recruit different components of the body to be able to respond to the environmental changes. And sometimes we call this negative feedback. Negative feedback is very handy. For example, when something happens, then it dampens whenever a response comes. For example, temperature, you're hot, you start to sweat. As you start to sweat, you cool off, then you stop sweating. That's a negative feedback. The coolness causes you to stop sweating. But there's also positive feedback, and that's useful too, especially in clotting of blood. So you first start to clot, so the blood, some of the blood cells interact with the connective tissue, and it causes a cascade of events. So one causes the next one to increase, until you have a clot there that closes up the blood that will be leaking out of a certain vessel. So we need both negative and positive feedback.
Dr. Johnson, we have a question about feedback, and they'd like to know, do the feedback mechanisms ever stop working, and if so, what happens?
Well, yes, they stop working. Sometimes, if they do, then you lose your homeostasis. That's what happens. For example, there's a feedback, we'll talk about hormones later on. So there's hormones that come from the brain that tells your glands to secrete, like the thyroid, for example. And then you could have antibodies that are mimicking that same thing, and they can cause the hormone to be secreted from the thyroid as well. And so, yes, that's disease states whenever you cease your negative or your positive feedback to occur. So that could, and that's what causes diseases whenever it occurs. Mm-hmm. Okay, there are different types of anatomy. We have macroscopic anatomy. That's what we see there in the body whorls. That's what you see in the gross specimens that you can see. So we can see that here on this dog's, this horse's foot here, lower part of the limb that we can see there. a gross anatomy. There's also microscopic anatomy. That's what you can see in a microscope. And that could be cytology, like a cell that we can see there. We see its nucleus. And there's histology, which is a study of the different tissues. And there's 4 basic types of tissues. Protoplasm is living substance. And living substance is the smallest unit of a living substance is a cell. Some animals only have a single cell. All animals have cells. All plants have cells. If they weren't, they would not be living. Rocks don't have cells, but plants do and animals do. When you have a group of cells that does about the same thing together, that makes a tissue or texture, muscle, nerve, epithelium, and connective tissue. And then when more than 2 of those tissues get together, that makes an organ. Organ. It could be like this. We see a kidney is an organ. And then organs get together, have a uniform function like the digestive tract, nervous system, a respiratory system. That's a system. So we go from cell, tissue, organs, and then organ systems. So epithelium. Epithelium covers things. You can see where it's covering this kidney right here. Also connective tissue that connects is what it does. Then we have muscle tissue. Muscle tissue contracts and moves things as we talked about. And there's nervous tissue. It's the control center. It receives the stimuli and it does the response to occur. So here we see epithelium. Epithelium is an outer protective layer. It's the outside of our skin. And for example, if you look at this belt right here, this is a belt, I took my belt off, you see the shiny part of the belt. That is epithelium. The rough part in the bottom is connective tissue that we'll talk about next. But the shiny part of the belt is epithelium. If you ever had a blister on your hand and it peels off, that upper layer is the epidermis, is the epithelium. It covers things. And here we can see the body wear oil. You can see that's the skin itself pulled off this individual. Then we see glands, and it covers cavities, like you can see there in the kidney. In the urinary bladder, it lines the urinary bladder, and it lines blood vessels. So that's what it does. It lines most internal spaces, and it also lines the outside. And so several things happen with epithelium. Metabolism of the body, everything that comes in with foodstuff, water, air, whatever, it has to go through epithelium to get into the body. Likewise, elimination of waste, urine, feces, all those go through epithelial cells. Epithelium covers organs, as we said, on the kidney. It lines viscera and also secretory glands. So if we look at this stomach here, we can look inside there. That's epithelium that's lining this stomach that we see here. So it lines the outside of viscera as well as it lines the inside of it as well.
We have another question, Dr. Johnson, about epithelium, and they would like to know how often is epithelium replaced?
Okay, that's a good point. Epithelium is replaced very quickly. If it's in the GI tract, it takes about 4 or 6 days to replace the lining of the digestive tract. So it's very quick, and that means cells divide often. And as a consequence, about 90% of your cancers are from epithelium. So remember that disease states, as a rule, is not something different. It's the same thing, just run astray. And so cancer is cell division that's normal, that runs out of control. So it's not a new cell division. It's the same type of cell division as normal things that occur in the body. It's just the regulation, the negative feedback has gone astray. So epithelium is absorption is one thing it does, and the cells are amplified on its surface area. You can see the the little projections off the surface of the cells on the left-hand side that increase the surface area by threefold to increase absorption area to occur. Also secretions, and here we can see some pancreatic acinar cells, cells that secrete pancreatic juices, and those are epithelium as well. Also transport is a very important part. In the eye, you have liquid that has to be transported in, transported out to maintain a certain pressure in the eye. Blood vessels, you have to have nutrients, oxygen, and carbon dioxide all has to be transported across these epithelial cells. And so excretion for the kidney and protection against mechanical damage, as we see there where you poke the skin, is protection against that. Secretory function and also a sensory function. We can see the pain, taste buds, olfactory, we can hear. The five senses that we have all relate to epithelium. And then we have contraction of some epithelial cells, contraction, the myoepithelium. This is what makes your eye dilate, is the myoepithelium. So epithelium lines the blood vessels. It lines the airway inside the body. So oxygen transferred from the air through the lining cells, lining the airway, and then it transfers through the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels themselves. So as I mentioned before, this shiny part is epithelium, but this is connective tissue. What does connective tissue do? Connective tissue connects, is what it does. It's the histologic glue. It binds the various things together that you have. You ever been eating a piece of meat and a little piece of gristle there, or fat, or connective tissue? That is connective tissue that we see there. And the main player is the fibroblast. And the fibroblast-like cell can be separated, can differentiate into a host of different other cells. Also the bone and bone marrow as well is also connective tissue. Here we see the ligaments that attach different bones. And unfortunately, I didn't bring that one today, but I did bring this horse's lower leg. And we can see right here where the ligaments attach to this bone that we see right here. So in order to prevent, the muscles will make this contract, but it only goes back so far. It's the ligaments that's holding that to prevent it from occurring. When it goes back too far, like you're playing football or something, then that's whenever you tear your ligaments. That occurs. Now also fat is connective tissue, and here we see an individual that's 130 pounds and one is 300, and you can see the deposition of the fat in the skin. So we'll talk about the skin later on, but that fat layer is at the lower level in the skin. Also connective tissue are blood cells. Blood cells connect. They carry oxygen from the lungs to different parts of the body. Is what they do. There's also white blood cells that are in there. If you've ever been bitten by an ant before and you see the little pus that's there, the little white stuff, that's white blood cells. And so that's a transient cells. They're just in there for a while until it gets to the area that is needed. If you have infection, you'll have more of those cells in your blood. So whenever you go to the doctor, they take your blood, they're looking at the cells because the different types of cells there indicate where you have a bacterial infection, where you have a viral infection, whether you have a parasitic infection, or maybe no infection at all. Also platelets. Platelets are parts of cells that live in the bone marrow that pinch off that causes blood clotting to occur. From there we go to muscle. Muscle are able to contract. And contractivity is a very characteristic component of protoplasm. Remember we said protoplasm was living substance. So very characteristic of almost all animal cells contract to some degree. Certain cells are especially adapted for it, and that is muscle that are able to do that because they have a high density of contractile proteins that are in there, as we'll see in a minute. So locomotion of multicellular animals, moving around, as you see. Beating of the hearts, and here we have a heart right here, and we'll see a heart beating later on. That's muscle that's doing that. Also, whenever you have things move through your digestive tract, that is muscle contracting there. When you move your eyes or roll your eyes, that's muscle. So muscle tissue, the function is to generate contractile force. That's what it does. It pulls on the bones through the tendons that they have. And in doing so, that keeps a correct posture, that allows movement to occur, that allows you to stand, that allows you to swim, all of those things. And it does that because it has a high concentration of contractile proteins, actin and myosin. And next week, we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of those proteins that are there. Dr. Dan Gott will talk about that. So nervous system is the next one. The nervous system controls things. And if we look at our dog here, we can see some of the nervous system. There is the brain. There is the spinal cord that we can see. There are different types of nerve cells that we can see. They transmit, they receive, and they integrate. That's what they do. Remember, we said before, to maintain homeostasis, they had to receive some message. So they receive it. And then they got to centralize that message. Tell muscle A to contract. That's what it does. And so they're very excitable cells. It doesn't take much to trigger them. And so here you can see where there's muscle cells, or long strings that we see there on the right are muscle cells, and the black structures that we see are motor end plates where the nerve ends on the muscle cell to tell the muscle to contract. And you can see where that nerve there is splitting, telling a lot of muscle cells to contract. And that's how you're able to coordinate your movement, is that the nervous system talks to a lot of muscle cells at the same time. So in order to communicate, you have to have special properties to receive messages, special properties to transmit message, and have to be long. Some look at those, from reach all the way to his toe, to his finger, from the spinal cord that you can see, and some already reach all the way up to the brain that we can see. So 4 basic types of tissue. The whole body could be categorized in one of those 4. Epithelium cover, connective tissue connect, muscles contract, and the nervous system controls, both detects and controls the movement. And here we can see our dog. This is our dog Slice, you've seen before. And we can see the different components of this. We can see his eye, we can see his brain, and we can see some salivary glands right in through there. There's glands that are in this dog. So if we look at epithelium, of course, the epidermis, the outside, is the epithelium. The eye, inside, lining that, the retina, all epithelium. Tongue, covering of the tongue, is epithelium. Glands, there we see the salivary gland, there, that's epithelium. Connective tissue, dermis, remember the belt, the dermis. And that is connective tissue below the lower part of the skin. And then we see bone. Bone is connective tissue. In muscle, connective tissue supports the muscle that we see there. And then muscle, we see muscle over the animal's head, muscle in his neck, muscles in his tongue. They can certainly move their tongue to move food under their tongue. Also, there's muscle in their hair follicles, attached to the hair follicles to pull it out. You ever seen a cat that's upset with the hair sticking up? That's a muscle that pulls that to occur. You ever had chill bumps or cold bumps? That's the muscle trying to pull the hair follicle out, and in doing so, it indents the surface of your skin. That's what that is. Nervous system, of course, the brain, right? But also within organs themselves, there's a local controlling system that occurs. And then, of course, there's nervous tissue in the eye. That's one of the senses that we have, right? Vision. And there's nervous tissues in the tongue. Taste buds. We're able to taste things, aren't we? And so if we look at our other specimen here, this is a dog cut a little differently. We can see the heart, see the lungs. So epithelium is covering these. Epithelium is lining these, lining this cavity that we can see. So epithelium, we can see is, of course, is the epidermis outside. Connective tissue, we can see somewhere here is a bone. There's a bone right there. There's a bone. The bone is connective tissue. Muscle tissue, of course. The heart is muscle tissue, but also we see muscle tissue there as well. And then the spinal cord itself would be nervous tissue, as there's other nervous tissue in there. So those are the four basic types of tissue.
Before we move on to our next thing, we have a couple of questions, Dr. Johnson.
Okay.
And they want to know, first, are the cells that make up, and I think that's written a little wrong, do the cells that make up different tissues have the same structure?
Okay. They do have the same components inside. They all have a nucleus. They all have the organelles, the various organelles for metabolism. They have mitochondria for energy or whatever. But how those organelles are structured are different. And a couple of differences between epithelium and connective tissue is important, because epithelium is the cells itself that is a secretory unit. It's the cells itself that have junctions that makes a lumen. In contrast, connective tissue is the cell product that makes the tendon strong. So whether you're talking about the cell itself or the product of the cell distinguishes the type of tissue that you have. Both of those, you have things outside and inside the cell. But in a tendon, what makes a tendon is the collagen. Another thing that's going to be in the evolutionary talk next week. Collagen is what is extracellular. It's produced by the cell, and that's what holds the tendon and ligaments together.
And one more question. They want to know, what happens to the old cells or tissues that are being replaced?
Okay. Well, they just die, disintegrate, and their components are excreted, either in the urine or in the feces, or other cells themselves eat it up. For example, in this, you might have seen people with tattoos. Tattoo is not a mark on a piece of paper. It's the ink is inside living cells, inside of macrophages, so they only last for about 40 years. And so whenever they die, other macrophages eat up the dead cells, and they pick up the dye, and they're not located at the same place, and as a consequence, the tattoo will lose its focus over time. And so other cells eat them. In the case of the digestive tract, they're sloughed off and go out with the feces, or maybe they go out with the urine. Any body fluid is going to have some cells being sloughed off, or they're just eaten up by macrophages. And later on, we'll see the immune system where there's macrophages throughout the body that eat these things. Macrophages are garbage trucks of the body, and you'll see that that's what they do.
All right, great, very interesting.
Okay, here we see the gross anatomy, but epithelium, of course, is the epidermis coming off. The muscle, the guy has walked, his muscle has walked out of his skeleton. And then we see connective tissue, of course, is the skeleton. And then we see the nervous tissue as well. So there are different fields of anatomy. There's surface anatomy, study of structures, as they appear on the surface, the epidermis that we see. Also, there's applied anatomy, so maybe surgical anatomy, maybe radiation anatomy, maybe kinesiology or exercise anatomy. There's also developmental anatomy. So you maybe study things of development. Here we see in that sheet there is the heart. So when the heart first starts out, it's just a series of cells and blood just goes one way. And then as it develops, blood takes a different path. And later on, we'll see the different path in the heart. All that is developmental anatomy. Now you could, and then there's neuroanatomy. So the study of their neurological structures, how they start, how they connect, what happens whenever things go astray. So if we move now from tissue to organs, one of the organs we've talked about so far is integument or skin. So skin is where you have 2 or more tissues. Remember, 4 basic tissues. And here we have skin. There's 3 different layers. The epidermis, as I mentioned, the part of the belt that's shiny that we said. Then you have the dermis, is the connective tissue. And the belt is made from cow leather, not horse leather. Why? Well, horses have very thin skin. If you had a belt made from a horse, it would stretch. You don't want your belt to stretch for the curve. That's why we have it made of cow leather as opposed to horse leather, because the dermis is thicker in a cow than a horse. And then below that, we have the fat. Remember, we saw that 300-pound individual? It's in that layer that you have that. This is what a bear wants to build up in the summertime so he can hibernate through the winter. And so here we can see that. The shiny stuff at the bottom is epithelium. Connective tissue is a pink. And then the white that we see there, it looks kind of like chicken wire, that's fat. And so that's the epidermis, dermis, and the subcutaneous or hypodermis that we see below. And so we can see what are the functions of skin. One is to protect against injury. And here you can see this guy. He just discovered his nervous system was telling him that he skinned his knee. It also protects against desiccation. We don't have to live in the sea anymore because we carry our sea with us. That's the fluids that we have inside the body. And it's the epidermis, the skin, that allows that to occur. Also, a temperature regulation, pressure. It also gives us clues about one individual. It doesn't take much effort to realize which one of these ladies is a mother and which one is a daughter. It tells clues about one's well-being. It also has fat in the subcutaneous layer. That's the white that we see. That's the energy stores for us to use whenever we're in between food. When we get to muscle, you see there's 3 basic types of muscle. There's smooth muscle, which is a little small muscle cell that we see there. Then the skeletal muscle has multiple nuclei, and then they have cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is branched, it's branched, and so that it can connect to other cells, it can communicate with other cells, so it can contract all at one time. And that's what we have in both this cow heart and this little dog heart that we can see. Cardiac muscle cells that branch and connect with one another. Bones, we can see the different bones there. There are long bones, short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, all these different bones that occur. And we can see some of those here in our dog Shorty. We can see him, that you can see. You can see his his ribs are up here, but then we can see the backbone in through there. You can see the bone. You can see there's bone here, and in between there we can see the little disc that are between there. Of course, they got a skull. All that is part of the connective tissue that we have. And I mentioned to you that tendons hold bone to bone, and the ligaments hold bone to bone, and tendon is connected to a muscle. If we look at that, we can see this is a deep flexor tendon that you see right there, and it'd be attached to a muscle there that would cause that occur, as opposed to the ligaments that attach bone to bone that we can see. And so, what can you do with those bones? You can maintain posture. You could produce, with muscles, you can maintain pulling of the bones, and that will maintain your posture. That could, you have movement. And so we call different movement, we have flexion or extension. And so if we look at this horse, which one is which? On this horse, that's the question for you. Yes, flexion is when you bend a joint. Extension is when you straighten the joint out, that we can see. Now there's cartilage and bone. Cartilage is a precursor to bone. In fact, whenever we are in the embryo stage, we only have cartilage. We don't have bone, and bone is replaced. In order for us to grow long bone, you grow the cartilage and it's replaced with bone. So cartilage is a cushion. It's in our joints. It allows you to jump up and down. It's a little bit of compressible, but what's missing is nerves. It doesn't have nerves in it, and so as a consequence, you don't feel the compression. You do feel compression if your bone is chipped or if something is wrong. Bone, that allows you to be upright. Look at that elephant standing there. It protects your vital organs inside there. That's what our rib cage is all about. And then also the skull protects you. And then also for hematopoiesis. So if we look at our horse's limb again, we can see that this is where the bone marrow is, and this is a source of the bone cells and platelets that occur. Both red cells and white cells is from this bone marrow that we see there. Now a little bit about the immune system. The immune system protects against foreign invaders. So all these foreign invaders are coming in, and it protects a germ-free environment. So we basically have a germ-free environment inside, and you want to maintain that. That's part of maintaining that homeostasis. So the immune system is very instrumental there. Now, what do these bugs look like? Here we can see there's a host of different things that we have. Now, how do we prevent them from gaining access? One is break the cycle of transmission. Don't let them come in, is one of the ways. Don't walk out at night when there mosquitoes are there, is one. Another is kill things, disinfect. Why do we have disinfectant? Why do we wash our hands when we go to the restroom? Disinfect, to kill the infective agents. And increase the resistance. Okay, why are we immunized against certain diseases? To increase the resistance. Those are the three mechanisms we have to combat infection. Now, how did that occur? The first line of defense is your skin. So the epidermis prevents things from coming in, is what it occurs. Also, what's inside the digestive tract is really on the outside. So you need the hydrochloric acid in your stomach to prevent that. From bacteria from going in there. It digests the bacteria too. Not all of them, but some of them it does. And then the mucus in the intestines. So you produce about 3 liters, you know how big a liter is, of mucus every day. And so that's always washing stuff out so that the bacteria ends up in the bathroom is where it is. So you break the cycle of transmission. That's what you're doing. The other thing is you kill the infective agents. And as I mentioned to you before, we have macrophages throughout the body. Now, these were discovered at different times, and so therefore they have different names. You have them in the lungs. You have them in the spleen. You have Kupffer cells in the liver. You have monocytes in the bone marrow, megakaryocytes. You have megaglia cells that are located in the brain. So these different cells, they're all macrophage, garbage collecting cells of the body. These are the ones that eat up debris, bacteria, and they eat up dying cells as well. And here we can see the bacteria there, as we can see, and we see a macrophage reaching out to get this one bacterium that we can see. So three things are important about the immune system. Without it, our vaccination would not work. So three little things to remember. One is acquired. You have to be exposed to it to have immunity against it. That's the reason we go to another country, we get sick on their water. They come here, they get sick on our water because they haven't been exposed to it. It's acquired. You have to be exposed to it. Second is specificity. It responds to whatever it's exposed to and not to what it's not exposed to. So your water doesn't make you sick, but the other folks' water does, and vice versa. That can occur. Also, it has memory. It remembers being exposed to something. You can inject cowpox, and it remembers that so you don't get smallpox. Polio vaccine is another one. So vaccination would be no good if you didn't have the capability to remember what it's been exposed to. So we see the lymphoid organs. There's a bunch of organs in our lymphoid system. The tonsils are very important because it tells the immune system what's coming. Whenever you're eating, the greatest exposure you have is things you eat or drink to the environment. And so it's telling them, something's coming this way. Let's mount a response. Let's maintain homeostasis is what is the physiology doing. So there's a host of different organs. Here we see a domestic pen. You see it there, pen like a pin in a shirt or something. And you can see there's bacteria on there. And there's a sweat gland duct. And you can see there's bacteria in there. So when you wash your hands, you can't get all the bacteria out. As a consequence, a surgeon has to use gloves to cover up the openings in his skin. That's why they have that. So the digestive tract, we're going to talk about a little bit. It moves things. Also absorption of the digestive things is what it does. And so we don't have much time to go through that. And then so there are different components of that. You're starting with the mouth, esophagus, stomach that we see. Some animals have 4 chambers. Some only have 1 chamber. Here's a stomach like ours or the pigs. It's only got 1 chamber. But a cow would have more than 1 chamber. A horse has more than 1 chamber, mostly 1 stomach, but it has another like type chamber as a cecum that's located later on in the digestive tract that we can see. Respiratory system, exchanges of fluid, is what exchanges of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide is what it exchanges. And note that the air doesn't go through, it's the gases that go through. So go from the airspace into the capillary that we see. Cardiovascular system, what's in the wall of the blood vessels has to adjust to whatever it's exposed to. So here, if you've got a big pressure, you have to have thick vessels. If you have metabolic needs, thin vessels that we can see. So here we see the capillaries on the outside. I just want to show you this. This is the pumping heart that we can see. So the top part of the heart contracts, and then the latter part of the heart contracts, and in doing so, that takes blood throughout the heart and then throughout the body system that we can see. So the cardiovascular system is composed of muscle arteries, arterioles, and then finally you go to capillaries. And note that only 5% or so is in the capillaries, not that much. So all the rest is vessels to accommodate the 5% to occur. And so we had the endocrine system, we have sensory system, the different senses that we have which relate to epithelium. There's my horse and my dog that we see. Unfortunately, both of those are dead. So we conclude that anatomy and physiology, remember function follows form. you got a rope, you can climb it. No rope, no climb. 4 types of tissue, different fields that you might want to be involved in, and their various organs of the body. If you want to see some images of histologic images, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/VIBS Histology, and you'll be able to see some structures there. Be happy to entertain any more questions.
Well, unfortunately, we're about out of time today, but if you'd like to learn more about anatomy and physiology, veterinary science, or other STEM-related materials, you can visit our website. It's peer.tamu.edu. And we look forward to seeing you next week as we learn some about proteins, their structure, and evolution. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.